Hello there. Welcome to the Inspire Wellness Solutions channel. My name's RJ. I got my man Alex here. Good evening, Alex.
Good evening. How's it going?
Good, man. I'm glad to have you here. We're here to do a first ever therapist react video. And I found a really interesting topic to go over that I really wanted to hear your thoughts and perspective on. It's covering masculinity. And so I saw this really interesting debate that Vice News put together with a pretty interesting, diverse group of individuals talking about the subject. And so I want us to kind of jump in and really hear your thoughts in real time. Anybody who gets any value or appreciates this type of video, please consider liking, commenting, and subscribing so we can put more videos like this together. And without that being said, let's go ahead and jump in.
My name's Krishna. Thank you all for being here and talking through masculinity, what it means to be a man, etc. Obviously, we couldn't fit every man in the country into this room. We tried to get a diverse perspective, but of course, that caveat, we're not everyone. I wanted to start by telling you why this is something that I'm interested in. I have an 8-year-old son, and I'm seeing him absorb what manliness might mean. I'm thinking to myself, what does it mean to be a man? To start, maybe we could just introduce each other to each other. And if you were to describe what it means to be a man or to be masculine.
My name is Tahoe. I'm a black man from the hood. When I was young, being a man, you had to be tough. You had to be hard. And now, to me, being a man is a lot different. Now, to me, being a man is knowing when to be soft, knowing that you don't always have to run the charge. You can actually listen. You know what I mean? So things have changed a lot over the course of the years for me.
I'm Griffin, and I don't identify as a man. I'm non-binary. I still have elements of, my identity that are masculine, elements that are feminine, elements that don't fall within that range. And I personally just don't feel tied to the norms or the confines of gender at all.
Well, welcome.
I want to ask you an initial question, Alex, just before we get too deep into the story. Do you have any pre-existing notions, before you hear what other people have to say, of what you think masculinity is to you?
Yeah, I grew up in a pretty, I guess, I don't say normalized, but the stereotypical what a lot of people would think a man is, or manliness is. So the being strong, I guess not showing as much emotion, being I guess that figure of strength in the household.
Yeah.
But personally, as I've grown, I still see there's benefit in that, and I still kind of live with that same mentality. But also there are times where it is okay to this is something I struggle with myself, is basically breaking away from those confines and actually being able to show any emotion that is not just I guess anger or frustration.
Yeah.
So that's something I've even the past, basically since more high school, more when you start maturing as a person, being able to actually make your own decisions.
Yeah.
I've, I guess, adapted different ideals, I guess.
Sure.
But it's still the same general gist as just the way I was raised.
And that's fair. And I appreciate you for sharing that. And I only asked you because it's a very complex idea that we are trying to kind of wrap our heads around, right? We've had existing ideas of what that more or less looks like, not so much the words, but we've seen examples, usually from maybe our fathers, uncles, grandpa, things like that. And so I think it's a very interesting subject to try to really deep dive into. And I hope that as you listen to what they talk about, some things might ring true for you, and it might also evolve in some of their thinking. And maybe you can resonate with some of that. And some of the men who are watching and women who may watch can also appreciate what these guys are talking about. But let's continue.
My name is Dylan, and I think that the notion of masculinity is just something that can be possessed by man or woman. Man, woman, non-gender conforming person. What it means to be masculine is just changing and very fluid. But I think that, masculinity is something that just, you embody based off of just how you show up in this world as a man, and just how you go about being your day-to-day.
How you show up. Interesting.
Yes.
What's up, guys? My name is Paul. I'm a fitness entrepreneur. I'm an immigrant. I came here when I was 4 years old with my family. It's kind of funny how we're talking about it. My take on masculinity is not about talking as much as doing. I think at its core, a man has to be efficient, competent, and be willing to do what it takes for themselves and their loved ones.
I was not always a good man. I was not always what you would call a healthy masculine man. And so as my life has changed, I've identified 5 points that I think make a truly masculine man masculine.
Okay.
I think point number 1 is a man who walks with God. Point number 2 is a man who stands on principle. Point number 3, which is a masculine man, is self-sacrificing. So someone who is willing to sacrifice for point 4, the people that he leads. A true man is a leader. And number 5, a masculine man is never a coward.
That's a lot there.
Yeah.
Let's get into that as we go on.
I think what it means to be a man is responsibility. As a man, it can come with a lot of power, and with great power comes great responsibility. In short words. That's it.
That's from Spider-Man, I think.
Yeah,
right?
that's what
Uncle Ben.
James.
Great Marvel reference.
My name is James Killen, former United States Marine turned Air Force officer. Got a couple combat tours, but I'm also a father of 3 girls who mellowed me out. The idea of masculinity is something that I find interesting because it is changing, and I can actually see those changes in myself. And I think that's one of the reasons why I wanted to do this panel.
Thanks for your service. Andre.
Hey, what's up? Yeah, men. I think my idea of a real man is, someone that gets the job done, and provides and all that. I don't even know what that means anymore, but yeah, I don't know. It's changing every day.
How do you think it's changing?
No, it just seems like everything's changing every day. It's like a new world order, so I have a hard time keeping up with stuff, so I feel like tomorrow it's gonna be something else, and people are gonna comment and be like, "You're wrong, it's this now."
It is hard to talk.
Alex, have you ever felt like that with what he was describing, the type of changes that are kind of happening in our society culturally and socially?
Yeah, I can definitely see where he's coming from, just because it does seem to, I mean, even just like the past 5 years, it's been just the preconceived notion has just changed so much. And
Yeah.
I don't think I pretty heavily agree with him right now so far, just saying that it's kind of hard to keep up with it, and giving your one day what you think may be the popular thought, and then the next day you would be I guess have the minority belief. So it's a slippery slope right now, I think.
Yeah. And I think that's a fair point to mention as well. It's just things can seem like they're happening rather quickly because a lot of the things that we've held true for a really long time are being challenged. And some of them are truly hard to just wrap our heads around. And I'm sure like as the video unfolds, you'll see more. But this is what I mean in terms of like challenging our viewpoint and the way that we see things. So I hope that as you see other individuals who maybe do align themselves more with traditional values, that you also see that there's a diverse array of people who also have different viewpoints, and that we're willing to at least engaging them like most of the men did here.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about some of this stuff because you feel like you might say the wrong thing.
I'm not really masculine myself, so I feel like I'm like the wrong person to ask.
Maybe the right person to ask. Christian.
What it means to be a man is to be a adult human male.
That's sort of a very formal definition, but I think that might be a good place to kick off because there's a lot of talk, of writing, of research these days that says there's a crisis in masculinity. Is there a crisis in masculinity? And if so, like, what is that crisis?
The thing that I see is a lot of deconstructing generational trauma. The be a man, boys don't cry, this, that, and the other thing. And I think that's actually one of the reasons why we see it as a crisis, because we're actually trying to redefine what it means to be a man, and none of us have any idea because we're just out here trying to be whoever we are.
That's right. I think that historically, being a man was rooted in patriarchy and misogyny. And now we realize how harmful that has been over the years. And so we don't really know how to define where we're supposed to be. And I think the reason, as they're saying, is a crisis is because the box has gotten so small for just being, say, straight, just being a hetero, right? Because if you do anything, women judge you.
What do you mean anything?
If I dance a certain way, or if I wear my hair a certain way, if I dress a certain way, they go, real men don't do that. Real men don't do that. And so you get scared to move a certain way because you don't want to get judged or outed out of the accepted part of your community. And I think that kind of has us in an uproar and we don't know where to be. Like, where's the safe place to be for men now, you know?
Quick question. Have you ever learned these words that they're using? Because I hear these get thrown around a lot in terms of the words patriarchy and misogyny.
I couldn't give you like a textbook definition, but
Sure.
like when they mention them, I have like a general understanding of what is being like referenced. But like if you ask me to give you a definition right now, I would struggle to give anything that sounds knowledgeable. So
That's totally fine. I'm actually going to pull definitions while we're watching this so that way we can all make sure that we're understanding clearly the words that people are using. Because I don't want to misrepresent what people are saying. So, for example, before we continue, let's define the words that I was just referring to. So, for patriarchy, it is a system of society or government in which the father or eldest male is the head of the family and descent is traced through the male line. Or another way to look at that, which I think a lot of people commonly use, is a system of society or government in which men hold the power and women are largely excluded from it. When I hear a lot of these words, I think that that second definition is more what people are thinking about, not so much lineage, more about feeling excluded from being able to make real change and impact. Does that make sense?
yeah, so I guess one thing I wanted to mention on like this comment of patriarchy
Mhm.
is I think there are like say that goes back say more like 50, 60 years, that time
Right.
period where it was very common for the man would go out, do his daily job, the woman would more stay home, take care of the kids, do
Mhm.
the housework type of things.
Right.
And even today, I don't necessarily see anything explicitly wrong with that as a way of living,
Sure.
but I think it's a good thing that we don't lock people down anymore. Like women aren't locked down to they can only, you know, they can only stay at home and live because I know like plenty of moms who much they love their life being able to like stay home, really provide for their family in that method of always being at like not always being at the house, but being the one that typically stays at home
Mhm.
while their husband goes out and works. And I don't see that as like a like some people may see that as like a bad thing, but I'm like as long as that family is happy with how they are living,
Mhm.
that is perfectly okay. And I've also had the roles flipped. I've have family members where more so the dad was like a stay-at-home parent and the mom would go and make the I guess make the money for the family like
Yeah.
actually going out to work. And I don't think one way or one side or the other is problematic. I think as long as they're properly happy, that's the biggest most important thing.
Sure. I would respect that point as well. I think to the point of that definition, I think it should be acceptable for women to not be held or, let's say, conscribed to one particular area of life, as in child rearing and being primarily the focus on the family. I do think it's important to understand that historically women have done that not only because maybe of patriarchy or because the system is trying to oppress them into doing that, but many of them have chosen that because that's sort of in their biological nature. Just like it is in a lot of cases, our biological nature as men to provide and to
Mhm.
provide security and financial stability and things like that. But I do agree there should be like latitude and flexibility to allow them to do the things that they would like to do. And then going back to the other definition before we jump back in, misogyny is the dislike of contempt or ingrained, meaning, really deeply embedded prejudice against women. So if I have this hardened nature where I'm just like, I disdain women, can't mess with women. I think they're beneath me. I'm superior to them at all times. That would be more along that alignment. And the reason why I'm defining that term is because a lot of times I've noticed in our society right now, we throw around a lot of words, but we don't fully appreciate the gravity of what these words mean and making sure that we're actually all understanding them before we choose to use them or leverage them against each other. But
Yeah.
let's continue.
I mean, and it's kind of disturbing.
You know, I was what you would call a toxic masculine male growing up. And I had good men that sewed into me, you know, they gave me good advice, but I never found manhood or never understood my place as a man until one day I humbled myself and I gave my life to the Lord Jesus Christ. And I'm telling you right now, walking with God changed my life forever.
Can you define toxic masculinity? Like,
I would say toxic masculinity is like what he was just saying, where you're using that leadership role or that aggressive nature in a harmful way to harm other people, to get your way. So the biblical structure for manhood is very humble. It's self-sacrifice. It's not self-motivated, but it is motivated by principle and standing on what's right. So there is a clear-cut vision for manhood in the Bible that I live by, and I think our culture used to live by, and I think our culture has lost its way.
I think everybody sort of has a different definition of toxic masculinity. I don't find masculinity toxic in and of itself, but I do believe in bad men, and bad men exist. But does that mean every man is toxically masculine? No.
When you're talking about a crisis on masculinity, I think that there's a lack of understanding there. So it's like masculinity, being masculine isn't toxic. It's just like there are portions of it that you can dive into that make it toxic.
Because I think a lot of what we think of masculinity is tied into patriarchy, right? Which is to say, like, for the longest period of human history, like, men dominated women and got the lion's share of stuff.
I think a lot of times some people make masculinity into a caricature, like it has to be this alpha bro tough guy.
Exactly.
And I find the low-key guy who, you know, is a really great father and a great husband and maybe not like drinking raw eggs every day to be a lot more masculine than the alpha bro who's going and like banging 20 women per weekend and not a responsible man. I find it more masculine to be a good guy.
I think that
Okay, I'm going to pause there because I think that that's a really good point that we need to kind of sit with for a second. So toxic masculinity. I don't know if you've heard this word get thrown on a lot, but I certainly have. And again, I tried to look up a definition on Google. And the first one that popped up, because naturally there is no specific definition, although I do see something on WebMD, which is kind of interesting. But the first one I saw was actually on Wikipedia. And it's not very precise, which I think is also the crux of this issue. So it says, toxic masculinity is a set of certain male behaviors associated with harm to society and men themselves. And then it adds, traditional stereotypes of men as socially dominant, which we kind of talked about with patriarchy, along with related traits such as misogyny and homophobia, can be considered toxic due to their part in promoting violence, including sexual assault and domestic violence. So we just talked about misogyny, which I don't know if that's necessarily true for all men, just being masculine, I should say, and homophobia. I don't know if all men or people believe that we should hate people who don't align themselves with a heterosexual lifestyle. I certainly don't. I don't know if you feel similarly.
Yeah, I generally live my life by the idea that as long as what someone is doing is not either harming themselves or harming me in any way, shape, or form, I don't have a problem with how they choose to live their life in really any regards. As to, it could be as simple as what do they like to do on a Friday night with the boys, or who do they want to choose as their partner.
Right.
Like, I say it's I don't have specific views depending on the specific thing. It's just a general idea that as long as you aren't hurting yourself or somebody else, you should feel free and comfortable to do whatever it is that you want to do, just within reason, obviously, but also that saying within reason has its own issues where, well, what is within reason, because everyone has their
Correct.
own everyone has
Absolutely.
their own what I would think is within reason, some person across the street from me might have different opinions. So saying that is not a very valid form because there is no definition for this is reasonable or this is not
Hmm.
reasonable.
You're right. You're absolutely right. That's the stuff that we need to think in more detail about. And again, this part of us discussing this, I'm not trying to bandwagon or jump on one side or another. It's more about truly trying to understand. And what I say to me, the purpose of the channel is we're trying to bridge this divide, particularly between men and women, but obviously focusing on the men because a lot of us don't talk about this stuff. But even when I read the definition, it said a set of certain male behaviors. So it wasn't inherently explicit. The only thing it pointed out was misogyny and homophobia, which, okay, we can understand that. Many of us don't subscribe to that. So that's kind of on the extreme end. But what I hear a lot now is a lot of men maybe feeling concerned, what some of the gentlemen had already kind of talked about, of just being a man and feeling like that is inherently threatening or disrespectful to other people, including women. And that is why I feel like there's this nuance that's being missed that, they're going to touch on a little bit more.
Yeah, I do feel that. Even personally, I feel that just like generally, just because a little bit more like I do think that my definition of if I were like like a husband, a masculine husband, whenever I
Mhm.
get to that point, I would want to be providing for the family, like being a strong foundation that people can lean on when they need it. Not to
Sure.
say that like the mother couldn't do the same thing,
Mhm.
but as like me trying to be a masculine and strong man, that is something that I would strive to do. And I feel some people I can talk to in some circles of the world or of
Mhm.
like socially may find that toxic.
Right.
And I guess that just kind of stems back to you talking about the definition of toxic masculinity. There is no like dictionary definition. And I
Mhm.
think that does pose a lot of problems because it's a term that people can kind of, it feels like a kind of a crutch term in a way
Right.
that you can kind of throw out there and say, you're just like, you're being toxically masculine. Like, you shouldn't
Right.
be doing that. But where the definition of toxic masculinity is not set in stone, so I feel like it causes problems sometimes if you and the person you're talking to, per se, don't have the same idea of
Mhm.
being toxically masculine. So
Absolutely. And that's why, even when we talk about in therapy, you got to define your terms because we can't engage in a meaningful dialogue or debate if we're not actually on the same page about what these words mean. And to your point you just mentioned a second ago, I think it's important to remember that sometimes when we use these words and if there is no commonly held definition or understanding of what it means and we can use it sort of subjectively at each other, it could be a good way to try to deflect from a conversation or a great way to stop the conversation because I feel like you don't agree with me or maybe I don't want to engage anymore. So I'm just going to throw this label on you and then let's keep it moving. But that doesn't help us better understand one another. That doesn't help us not put each other as enemies and make it more easier for us to actually engage in meaningful discussion. But let's continue with what they're talking about.
Background of this is that we are saying that gender is this like real thing that has real ideas and implications. And Griffin, I'm wondering, as someone who identifies as non-binary, how does this conversation strike you?
Well, I think that it kind of becomes like irrelevant whether or not we attribute like having like a good ethical compass to being like masculine. Attributing that to like the gender constructs which we have made up, which are like somewhat pointless, like kind of just feed into needless roles that uphold the patriarchy without even knowing it. A lot of those things are just things that people should be doing because they're like morally right. Like if you're in a family, you should probably support your family. And I really don't think that it has to do with like your manhood.
These characteristics that we're talking about are baked into an old system of domestic life.
I think that's actually where we get toxic masculinity. Like, none of us can really describe what it is, but we can see it when it happens.
So we learn it, right?
Human, yeah.
This is something we learned from the world. It's something we learned from like TV and shit. And it's maybe something we learned from our dads too. Tell me about your dad.
I'm a first-generation kid. My dad is from Guyana. Grew up in very humble beginnings, poor family. First time I remember my dad telling me he loved me was when I was 17. And he was like saying like he was proud of me because I was about to graduate high school and things like that, you know. I'm appreciative of all the other things, you know, being present as a provider, but in terms of like, you know, the conversation piece and like, oh, I want to talk to my dad about, you know, sex or something, or I want to talk to my dad about, oh, this person broke up with me and I'm feeling pretty sad about it. I didn't have those conversations.
So like emotional language as part of like how you talk to your dad.
Yeah.
And my definition of manhood came solely from my relationship with God. It didn't come from my father. It didn't come from the good influences around me.
Is God a man?
Yeah, and God is a man.
He is.
God is a father, and he's a good father. He's a perfect father. And so I think there is a clear definition of manhood where I guess that's where I diverge from everyone else in the room. I believe manhood is clearly defined by God. It is the perfect example of what a man should be.
Christian, I see you nodding your head.
I grew up in a divorced home. When you do grow up in a broken home and you don't have a father in the home, you recognize how important sort of both males and females are in raising a child and being in the home.
There's a balance between, you know, masculine energy and feminine energy.
Absolutely.
And I feel like there's both within everybody. And so there's a balance that with masculine energy in itself that I think a lot of people have trouble trying to like reconcile within themselves. Like, yes, being a man, you work hard, you take care of your people, but you got to be able to have that emotional side too, which is where the feminine energy comes in.
I think that is a beautiful point that he's making there. I think you were making the same point, if you correct me if I'm wrong, Alex, earlier, in that we can be more as men, more than just the traditional providers, but we can also allow for some emotional, maybe space to be vulnerable, to use our words and language to express how we feel to like children, other loved ones, you know, friends, whoever you value. Would you say that you align sort of what you were talking about earlier with what that gentleman just said?
Yeah, I would say that I heavily agree with that, and just like that resonates with just how life was for me. Like, I'm not going to give my whole life story, but basically more like the last few years when I've been more old enough to like really pay attention to these type of things.
Mhm.
That like, especially after my parents get remarried, I feel like stuff like it. My dad really started. He had the, at least from what I can remember, and I was really young, so I don't have the perfect recollection of it, but
Sure.
more of that traditional manhood and being strong, really working your butt off, working in the long hours to really provide for the family.
Mm-hmm.
And I just noticed that lately, and this is a good thing too. It's a lot more, I guess, personal conversations, if that makes sense. Like
Yeah.
letting basically letting your guard down around each other because both of us have like that general just like we don't like to show our emotions like any if we're frustrated or upset about anything I've been like my parents get on me all the time about like bottling stuff up, and
Mm-hmm.
I think that is just like part of my preconceived notion of what it means to be a man and to be masculine.
Yes.
And part of that is like the whole bottling up is very deconstructive. It's not good for you. And
Oh yeah.
I recognize that I shouldn't do it. And that is something like I personally still work on to this day is I just not like letting frustrations build up and finding some form of outlet to get that out, whether it's like going out and working out and being a more physical method
Mm-hmm.
or just like talking it out to somebody.
Absolutely. And I appreciate you for sharing that, man. Do me a favor real quick in the audience. Remind us how old you are.
Oh, I'm 21.
Okay. I'm asking that because I want to make a point. So, for those of us that are particularly are at Alex's age, or even any of the gentlemen that are on the panel right now, it's important for us to remember, as Alex just pointed out, and I've actually felt very similarly, a lot of us don't learn like the language we're supposed to learn to be able to be expressive with other people, particularly with our own family members. So it's no wonder that, to his point, we end up bottling everything up and we don't have nowhere for it to go. And it's very destructive in our lives because we end up taking it out on other people, or we can end up focusing it within, which is not particularly helpful because we don't resolve anything. That doesn't benefit us in any way, shape, or form. So I just wanted to make that point because so many of us don't understand that in and of itself is not helpful for our mind and in our hearts, and not letting a lot of these things out or finding a creative or personal outlet to share that with people. If we don't learn how to do that sooner than later, like your age, Alex, when you get my age, mid 30s, it gets more difficult. And if you get even older, it can feel, not actually, but it can feel almost impossible. So we want to tackle these things much sooner and not let them get to this point. But let's jump back in.
Y'all just like triggered something in my head when y'all was speaking about having both in the home. To me, I didn't really have it there. And it made me feel a way, but I think that I always wanted one. And so I wound up at a certain age going outside and trying to find what masculinity was outside. And so I went on the corner, and there were 20 of us on the corner, and none of us had dads. We were all messed up, and so we all taught each other the wrong way to love, to be loved. And then I think in society, there's way more people like that.
And a lot of kids who don't have fathers in the home,
No, you're good, man.
look for that father in the world or in a different way.
Well, first, I think that attributing proper family values to a heterosexual couple with children is just not effective. I think that it's obviously a heteronormative take to be man and woman and then a child, and that's how you create a good family. And whether it's a single mother, single father, or a queer couple, I don't think that it's necessary to attribute men and women to certain roles in the household. I think that it's only due to nurture those gender norms that we follow.
Male and female matters. God gives you one of those identities, you take on that role. And now you're responsible for not or for fulfilling that role. There's a masculine crisis because men are not taking responsibilities for the God-given roles that they have in society. And so when you take away the need to say, God made you this or God made you this, now you don't have to take responsibility for not fulfilling what you were called to do.
When you do that, you also take away other things that somebody else may do. If I have a woman or a partner that wants to take on certain roles and I say, hey, those are my roles that God gave me in society, now I'm suppressing that person. At the end of the day, we're all human beings. You define who you are and how you behave under God. That's what God gave us, free will.
But also, I think that the religious beliefs should not be used to dictate how other people identify or how other people live their lives.
Humans need predictability, and when we put each other in these boxes, it gives us the opportunity to make decisions quickly. And I think that's what we're fighting as a civilization at the moment, is the desire to put 7.5 billion people in specific boxes so that we can have some sort of predictability or stability in our lives. I was an emotionally abusive young man in my 20s because I had an idea of what my wife should do, and it caused a lot of stress.
Why were you the way you were?
I had a lot of anger. I had a lot of pent-up rage. I had, some combat stress that I had to deal with also that I wasn't dealing with because men don't show emotion.
There is a social construct.
Got to pause there again. He made a beautiful point, which you were talking about earlier. And man, I can't say this point enough because so many young guys that I work with, we all sort of operate from the same framework. It's like nobody ever taught us any other emotion but anger. That's the one that most of us know really, really well. Because I think in my experience, both personally and professionally, that's the only socially acceptable, and I put that in quotation marks, socially acceptable emotion for men. If you try to show something else, a lot of guys I notice they'll get shamed or looked down upon or told that they're weak and all these other euphemisms that we say. And it's really not fair because we want society wants us as men to evolve, but they don't always create the space for us to be able to, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it seems I can't think of the term I want to use for it. But you're saying, you have, I guess, I don't know if double standards would be the right way to say it, but they're wanting you to, I guess, wanting men to I don't know if change is the right word, but like you were saying, we don't always have the. Sometimes societally, we are looked down upon if we start showing more emotions, like you're
Hmm.
saying, like the socially accepted in quotes
Hmm.
feeling for men is anger, and I feel like sometimes whenever I you try to break it, depending who you're talking with, of course. I've been lucky
Yeah.
that my family is like supportive like that, but not everyone is fortunate like that.
Right.
So if you are trying to break that norm and actually like show any form of emotion that's not just pent up rage or anger,
Hmm.
I feel like societally, for in many cases, you are, I don't know if shunned is the right word for it, but you're kind of like looked down upon if you are breaking those social norms.
Yeah. No, you're speaking to what I was just trying to make a note of. I think, and when I try to make these points, again, I'm always trying to come from a place of understanding. This isn't trying to pin men and women against each other, nothing like that. But what I do say genuinely, and I say this to moms, I say this to girlfriends, I say this to wives, as well as I challenge the men, I say two things. For us as the guys, I want us, and I'm trying to help us to evolve, to change, to your point, where it is more comfortable for us to speak openly and honestly about how we feel. That can be with your partner, your wife, your girlfriend, your spouse, whoever that may be. That could be with your children. That can be with your good friends and your family. I would like for us to be able to do that across the board, right? But I understand that that takes time. It's not going to happen tomorrow. And on the other side, whether it be the school's environment, family environment, relationship environment, job environment, for them and all of that put together to create slightly better conditions for men to be able to be comfortable to talk about that stuff. Because men, we can be ready to get into it, right? But if I'm in an environment that doesn't make it comfortable for me to want to talk about it, I'm not going to. Comfort's a huge, it's a huge necessary component for vulnerability. It won't happen if the person's not comfortable. It doesn't matter, how ready that person is to spill their guts or to talk about whatever it is that's bothering them. So that's always like the dual challenge that I give. For us, we can do a better job and we have to do a better job to let more of these things out in a healthy way so that we're not angry, so that we don't engage in negative behaviors, negative attention, that kind of stuff. And we need the other people in our lives to support that journey and that endeavor and work on whatever limitations they may have in their own mind of how men should behave and allow us to feel and to express it.
I agree, yeah. And I think just like a little bit more on that point, I
Mhm.
think it's important to give that environment, but to not force anything out of somebody. So give
Yes.
the person the environment that they are able to let their guard down, show their
Mhm.
emotions, and then after that, don't really push it.
Yeah.
Just give if let them if they're having any troubles, let them speak that once they are either they want to or
Mhm.
comfortable, and if they're in a comfortable environment already, they'll be more likely to vent, like
Yeah.
tell how they're feeling.
Absolutely. Right on.
That benefits men. And so the responsibility that I've learned as I've gotten older is learning how to not enforce my power, learning over women, over people.
You're saying that that role gives men more
Privilege?
like an advantage and privilege. I'm saying that it is more self-sacrificing. I do not have free time. I do not have hobbies. I do not wake up during the day and do what I want to do ever. I'm thinking about my wife, my kids, my business.
But that's your decision, and that's not like a mandatory thing of your masculinity.
Well, if you believe that God is true,
I don't.
and you believe that He is God, then you do have that responsibility.
What privileges are you referring to? Like what privileges do men have?
We've constructed this entire society to benefit us.
Break it down. Like what privileges exactly?
Like we talk about the wage gap, or if you look at Roe versus Wade, men controlling women's bodies.
Even if there might be those privileges, there's also more men who commit suicide, more men incarcerated.
I think when you talk about like incarceration rates and things like that, like things that men are a victim of, I think that it's important to like recognize, like, I don't think that men are oppressed solely on the grounds that they're men. I think that men like experience oppression based on like the intersections of their identities, which is, you know, why we see like different like lower class jobs being worked by men, or like higher suicide rates, or like incarceration rates going up, because like men, like black men, brown men, indigenous men, queer men, trans men, etc. Those people like face oppression, they experience oppression, but it's not solely due to their identity as a man.
But I think dating and sex is probably a very interesting place to think about this, because it's a changing field as far as like what people expect of each other.
I date in New York City a lot, and dating-wise, there's a lot that's like asked of a man. Like first dates are like nightmares.
I got a question on that, yeah.
Dude, it's like, I'm like, what do you want? They got like a checkbox, like, are you gonna pick me up? Are you gonna walk on the outside of the sidewalk? Are you gonna open the door? Are you gonna pull out the seat? Are you gonna pay for the meal? Are you gonna be interesting during the dinner? Are you gonna be funny during the dinner? And then when you walk home, are you gonna drop me off? Are you gonna watch me walk inside? And then are you gonna text me after? And it's like trying to defuse a bomb. Like if you think you're like red wire, blue wire, and you're like one little thing and you're just done. And it's like, I'm to the point where I'm like, I'm so tired of like paying $150 for a first date, and then you just ghost me. And the next week I'm like hurting for cash. I'm like, I could have really used that $150. Like, why did I have to, you know what I'm saying?
The trade-off of like going on a date.
Alex, I'm curious. Have you ever had an experience like that at all before?
I'm very careful, and I will say I can really like relate to where he's coming from though.
Mhm.
And it's part of why I haven't even like bothered in any form of like dating and since like 2019 or something.
Okay.
Like, I mean, part of it is it's not very feasible right now, but part of it is I really just don't want to, for similar reasons that he's giving.
Yeah.
Because I've had like this same general like expectations put on me, and it does get kind of exhausting at times when it's. I'm not saying everybody's gonna have those same limitations,
Yeah.
but if it's just like me personally, it gets really exhausting having to even just think, like worry about whether that's going to even be a possibility. And it's
Yeah.
just like, for me right now, it's just like, it's a stress that I don't think the benefits outweigh this. I guess, even if it's nice, it's just not worth the stress for me right now.
It's
So
fair. It's completely fair, man. I mean,
I don't want to like that to come out wrong saying that all women are stressful, but just based off of my past life experiences and where I am at right now, just with my life and where I am trying to go, it's not a high priority, and it's a stress that I don't necessarily need in my life at this exact moment. But
okay.
it would, yeah.
No, that's fine, right? Like you can totally be at that place. I mean, you're young, you're trying to figure things out, you're focusing on yourself, which I think those are great things to do, especially as men, because we have a lot of, as that man pointed out, a lot of expectations, that get bestowed upon us. And I can definitely appreciate his frustration. And I kind of grew up a little bit more before his time and your time. So I feel like I understood a little bit more about what those expectations look like in terms from a traditional sense. But I can definitely appreciate that it can feel overwhelming, especially as a man, to be the one, especially when we talk about things like dating traditionally, is to have to initiate all the time. And he talked about, ghosting. So feeling like I'm investing in something that I don't really get a benefit from, which is getting to know this person still. And I can definitely appreciate where that comes from. So I think it's again, it's part of this very nuanced discussion that we're trying to have. And we're not saying like, oh, you shouldn't expect these things to happen, because the expectations will be there. That's traditionally kind of how women treat men. But what I say is I think we can do a better job on both sides, men and women, to communicate what those expectations are off the bat, right off the bat. Because if you understand that, like he said, the word bomb, it kind of diffuses it immediately. Because I understand, okay, what is she looking for? Well, what am I looking for? Let's put that on the table right off the bat, right? Because if we're not on the same page, then we can respectfully say, you know what? Okay, let's go our separate ways. No harm, no foul. So we don't have to worry about investing so much energy into that situation. However, if we do what a lot of us have done, which is trying to figure it out, that's kind of like, I feel like what he was trying to describe, right? That's very difficult. That can be very frustrating and then can lead to being overwhelmed because I don't really know exactly how this is supposed to work. I'm just sort of learning through failure multiple times. And that can demoralize you to a point where, you know, you just kind of give up. So,
Yeah, I 100% agree.
okay.
And as the man being like, oh, this sucks, I have to pay, or as the woman being like, oh, this sucks, I might get murdered, is like a pretty big, imbalance.
On a first date, should the man or whoever identifies as the man on the date pick up the check? Show of hands, who thinks yes?
Yeah, should is a weird.
Yeah, should's a weird way to put it.
Okay,
That was
sorry.
weird.
How would you put it?
I very much love gender roles. I like masculine men, and I want my masculine man to pick the check up. My friends seem to be the same. My girlfriends seem to want that as well. But I have a male friend who was naturally doing that, and with the dates he was going on with women, they were offended that he like took the check. So I think like, hey, if this woman doesn't want him to pay and she wants to show she can pay, go off.
I think it's a matter of preference. Like, you know, if someone picked it up for you, like you develop a kind of rapport or respect with that person, like, so be it. If the other person, you know, the woman you're with doesn't want that, then maybe it's not the match for that person. So I think it's dependent on the situation.
I think that there's such a thing as financial abuse. And men seem a lot of time because they spend that a woman has to be under them or owes them something.
I think that's when you get toxic.
Me personally, I love to take care of my partner. I love that feeling that I give them that they're taken care of when they're with me. And that's when it's with friends, anybody. If you're with me, I got you.
Like, I guess what I'm hearing from you, Andre, is that there's like a lot of pressure to inhabit the masculine side of the social expectation, and yet you might not get the benefit that you would have expected generations ago, and that puts you in a weird position.
Yeah, well, we live in a city where there's 8 million people, and you know, a lot of these girls, especially if you're really attractive, guys are hitting on them all day, so they feel like celebrities. You got so many options. I don't blame you. I'd be the same way. It becomes like
always somebody better.
I think technology has a big part to do with that now. Like modern times, like online dating, Instagram.
Especially as a girl, you're gonna have 30 DMs a day.
Yeah, the
You know what I'm saying?
DMs.
Swipe it up on your picture.
I think
every
that's a big reason why it can be tougher for some men.
not successful.
I think what he's saying is
successful.
there's a toxicity to femininity as well. There is a toxic side to both genders.
Well,
I
on
think,
the
I think
flip
anybody
side-
can be narcissistic, but I think that it's like weird to randomly attribute that to like women in New York because they're being complimented all day.
There's a term that's called absolute power corrupts absolutely. So, but that is, when we're talking about masculinity, that's what we've had. We've typically had that. We can do whatever we want, and we do it because we squeeze, we corrupt, we take. Historically, you take over things, places that you don't like, and you rape the women, and you take the gold, and you do what you want because you have that power. Now, when we see women have that power, we're like, whoa, she's literally just getting a taste of the power that men have had for centuries.
But on the flip side of this perspective of dating, of like the poor guy who goes on these dates and gets ghosted and it's a struggle to date, on the other side of that is men have more sex, men cheat more, they have more affairs. So if I'm a woman and I'm looking for a guy, I would be really selective. I would have a list of what I was looking for, and the guy would have to meet those standards and they would be high.
That's another great point that I want to echo real quick, because I talk about that a lot too when it comes to dating and it goes back to the point I was making before about communicating clearly what your expectations are, because then you have less likely you're going to get frustrated, is if you're dating intentionally. So for example, if I try to use you in this example, you were saying, yeah, I'm not trying to do that right now because I'm trying to focus on me, my education, like my career, things that you want to build for yourself, right? And I think that that's great. Because then whenever you are ready, you're going to be in a great position to communicate exactly what you need and what you're looking for. And if that person does not match that, then I imagine you will, respectfully pull back. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, it's fair. That's fair to say. Yeah, just
Okay.
like even just in past relationships, I've like had my fair share. So like I have more of an idea of what is important to me
Mm-hmm.
and what I look for in a partner.
Right.
And as long as anybody that I may try and meet in the future is like say, and they just like saying don't fit the criteria seems like such a negative way of putting it. Like, oh, you didn't
Mhm.
make the cut, you're not good enough. Which like I mean, like if you want to go technicality, technically no, but like I don't think it's doesn't have that ill intent. It just
Right.
has the goal of I doesn't help either of us if we get into a relationship and nobody's happy. So
Absolutely.
if I can just tell it how it is right away, if I'm not feeling the connection, what have you, if I can say that right away, it may suck in the moment, but it's
Mhm.
going to save us possibly decades of stress and frustration.
Mhm.
And if everyone can get on that same understanding, that then I think people generally would just be not as worried about putting themselves out there because
Yeah.
it can be stressful, especially just depending on who you are. It can be especially stressful trying to really put yourself out there.
Absolutely, man. That happens often. And that's why like when the guy was pointing out right before we paused about having a list. I talk about that a lot. Like if you're going to date intentionally, you probably would take the time to create a list of items. What I usually talk about is deal breakers, things that I know that like I can't tolerate, I can't deal with, I can't compromise on. And that can't be your entire list, right? I usually say maybe like up to maybe 5 to 7 items, no more than that. And then everything else, you got to be willing to compromise on. You got to be flexible because there's no perfect people, there's no perfect individuals, but a lot of us don't do that. We don't have those things already prepared. So naturally, when it comes time to sit down and like review that, whenever you're going on dates with people, we're probably wasting a lot of unnecessary time. And then again, we're not communicating those expectations to each other. So then people are just kind of guessing the whole time, which can create more anxiety because you're like, I don't know where I stand. I don't know if they want to be here. I don't know if I want to be here. I think what you're saying is also very important in kind of taking that time to reflect within, work on you, figure out what you want. So when you decide to date, hopefully intentionally, you'll be more likely to find what you're looking for because you were more thoughtful about it before you even started.
Yeah, I've had like more high school relationships where it's like you just jump in there because you're a stupid high schooler and
Yeah.
just makes decisions on a whim, doesn't actually think them through. And I've had my fair share of like issues and problems that arise when you do those things.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
just like
It happens, man.
I mean, it's your time. I think that's like high school, college is your time to make mistakes, and as long as you're learning from them, there's no problem with like making those mistakes up front as long as you're like actually learning from them. So
Yes. That's the most important part. So that way, hopefully, you stop repeating the same decisions.
yeah,
And me pointing out the whole create that quality list and know what you're looking for, that's me trying to provide wisdom. If you know you want to be with somebody, if you know you want to get married, if you know you want to build a family one day, it sort of behooves us to then act intentionally. So make sure you're screening these people out based on what you know you need. And the first step is you got to know what you need. Because if you don't know, then you definitely can't explain it or express it to anybody else. So that's why I like the point that that guy was mentioning. And I think they're going to go into a little bit more.
I think that over the last several years, the Me Too movement has given a lot of insight into what women are feeling in the workplace, what they're experiencing, how they're being abused and otherwise silenced, how institutions of power have kept them silent. And we've heard some really awful stories and some terrible shit. I want to hear from you guys what you think about what the Me Too movement did. Has it gone too far? What does it mean for you?
I think it's good for women to expose men who are doing evil things in the workplace. I think it's been a good thing in exposing sexual abuse. There's also the opposite side of that coin where women are allowed privilege to do certain things that men are not. So in the workplace, I was working at a place where a woman was grabbing me inappropriately, doing things that were inappropriate. And when you bring that up to your coworkers, you know what they say? They laugh and they say, you should be excited, right? So if a man is sexually abused, the stigma totally changes.
Well, I don't think Me Too necessarily like is what prevented people from believing you and your story. And like your story is valid, like I'm not here to suppress that, but I do think that like it's worth noting women are far more likely to be victims of sexual assault.
You just experienced a little bit of weakness that women feel most of the time.
When we're talking about constructs, you know, you guys are saying we need to deconstruct masculinity. I'm saying there are unequal biases with both genders.
When it comes to it not necessarily being as viewed as valid, it happens to be the case because of other men, though. You know what I'm saying? Like, other men are the people that downplay that, and that's where we come back to the talk of, you know, patriarchy and things like that.
It was put in place by men and is enforced by men.
Well, and I went for a walk to get dinner last night, and I walked several blocks because I wanted to check out a few things, and it was dark. Not a single time did the idea that I would be physically or sexually assaulted cross my mind. Not a single time. I can imagine that doesn't really work out for women.
It comes down to biological differences. As a man, you're more likely to be able to have more of a chance to fend off someone attacking you. As a woman, not really. So that's why, you know, we have things like mace and tasers or having a gun.
Is it something about it's hard to admit that you're a victim?
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
And to complain about it. People look at you like, remember Terry Crews? He didn't get his nuts squeezed and shit.
Right.
It's like,
You know?
why didn't you do something? Why'd you let him?
Look how the world ridiculed him. You know, oh, you ain't do nothing. Like, oh, you a bitch. You know, so we as men, especially super guys that grew up in super masculine houses, we don't really like to admit weakness.
Well, and it's in our language, right? Like, don't be a bitch. Like, don't be a pussy.
Right.
Like, it's very
We
real.
internalize that.
Yeah.
But that's all examples of like toxic masculinity. Like it's never to invalidate somebody's experience, but like it must be obvious that like these are rules and roles enforced by men and created by men.
Well, in toxic masculinity and power kind of go hand in hand. I mean, we're talking about peanut butter and jelly.
You know what it is? I think sometimes we gotta go to work, and like if we're caught complaining about it, we're like admitting weakness. It's like you're not a man.
How does that feel?
It doesn't feel great, but that doesn't stop me from doing what I need to do. If you talk about a little bit of pressure that goes with it, yeah, there's a little bit of pressure. If you can withstand it, you become a successful man.
But what does that have to do with being a man? Like, surely like a woman can do all those things, so why even attribute it to your gender?
That's a good point, but I think also, if you're talking in terms of biological differences, generally, men are more logical, right? More reasoning, more
I
factual
disagree.
based.
There is no scientific backing for that whatsoever.
I just think it's a commonly used stereotype. I mean, I'm
So
not.
they-
I just maybe talking about, okay, you guys can say that. I think more about me. Like, I'm more of like a logical,
Sure.
factual-based guy. Like, I have emotions, but, you know, I don't let that deter me from what I need to do, like my reasoning.
Do you talk with people about your emotions a lot?
I mean, I have friends. I have close guy friends I can talk to.
You do?
Yeah.
There's an interesting thing came out where, like, guys these days have fewer than 3 friends. Like, it's hard for...
Let me pause there real quick, because I think that he brought up a couple of good points there. In terms of the being expressive and asking the question, do you have people around you that you could talk to? Would you say that you have people in your life that you can confide in?
Yeah, I'd say more times where I don't talk is more like personal, my choice. But I can name even just outside of my immediate family that I could go to if I was in like a time of either having a hard time, a time of crisis, or if I'm just having a really terrible day at school and like I needed like to vent to somebody. I'd say that I have people that if they have the time, they would typically be able to, I guess, help out in that way.
Okay. I mean, I think it's healthy to their point. Like, you know, we want to have somebody that we can talk to about whatever we have going on. But, you know, we're talking about the idea that what it means when a man tries to open up. And again, they kind of use shaming language to describe like why you shouldn't behave that way, why you shouldn't open up. And it keeps going to that point. Like he was kind of driving that idea that men are shaming men, or men are enforcing these rules that keep us in line, to say like, well, men aren't allowed to do that. That's where I'm certainly pushing back, just speaking for myself, to push back against that idea that we're not allowed to do that. But at the same time, those expectations of being a provider, making sure you're taking care of your home, your household, particularly if you have a spouse and children, like the Asian brother was saying right before we pause, I still have to get up and do the things that I have to do. right? So I can't afford to just like let my emotions completely take me over all the time, even if I might feel like that sometimes. And I still have to get the job done because people depend on me. And that is a component for a lot of us of what it means to be a traditional man. So I think part of this is like the nuanced part of the conversation, trying to evolve our thinking. Well, some aspects I would agree, wanting to be able to be relied upon, provide for, take care of others. I love that stuff. But at the same time, and I'm glad that you have that, because I know a lot of us that don't, that we have people around us that we can confide in when we are having those moments where we want to be more vulnerable and learning to express those things. I think that's really important. And when a man needs to open up or he needs to share, certainly don't shame him. General PSA for everybody out there. Don't shame him for wanting to open up. That's what puts us in the conditions that we're in presently, where we don't want to say anything to anybody. But let's continue.
Men to make friends with each other.
I think that's a big problem now in modern times, because you hear about, you know, the suicide rates going up. I think that's a big reason for it. Men aren't allowed to talk about it with safe people. So if you talk about masculinity crisis, that's a crisis right there.
I think that men find friends very easily in terms of like, oh, yo, you lift 240, I lift 242, let's spot each other, like basketball or whatever. But I think that we have superficial relationships in those friendships, you know, in which like it's very like surface level, like coming back to what you're talking about. We don't talk about feelings and things like that. That comes back to how, you know, you're brought up and how like boys are taught in certain ways, how we go about talking to each other and how we go about expressing ourselves.
How much of this is men putting ourselves in a little box? I can tell you, I wouldn't have shared my emotions with people when I was younger, but I have people in my life now who I feel completely comfortable sharing my insecurities, my vulnerabilities, you know, how I'm feeling. That ends up being one of the reasons why men end up with limited friends, because, I mean, how many people can you actually feel like you can be open and honest with?
But there's something holding people back.
Yeah,
men
and I think it's us. I think we're doing it because we're putting ourselves in this masculinity box, if you will.
I think that vulnerability for men oftentimes is viewed as surrender, and like that is you know what I mean, that's an example of weakness in which like someone can possibly take advantage of it, or it used to be viewed as such, you know, where it's like, all right, cool, like he cried, oh, that means he's soft, so now I can challenge him.
And this is something that I really struggle with. As a black man that grew up in the hood, you couldn't be soft. You couldn't come outside. You know what I'm saying? So you had to take on this persona in order to be a quote unquote man. As I got older, I realized I still had to do that with women. I had to be a certain way for them to look at me as a man. And if I didn't perform in that manner, they also called me a bitch.
Yeah, they want a real, like...
Right?
Poster.
So it's like, as progressive as I may want to be, is the world accepting of that as a whole? Because even if the other men don't like it, but the women like it, I might be like, I don't care what the guys think, as long as the women like it. But there are spaces where the women will be like, look at him, he wants a finger in his butt. Sorry.
No, let's talk about fingers in the butt.
Now, that's an interesting point. That, to me, minus that last part, was pointing out like why exactly what I was trying to say earlier. Sometimes it's not just like, okay, men are holding men back, and that's why we're not evolving, or that's why we're not sharing. It's also that the spaces that we come up in. And I'm saying this also professionally, like I've had to coach parents, moms and dads, of the way, and I've listened to the way they speak to their sons. And I'm saying this more about the boys because young girls don't usually have this issue. Everybody traditionally allows girls to express themselves, right? It's little boys that we have this issue with, where we don't tell them it's okay and ask them what's wrong and helping them validate their lived experience so that they don't run from emotions. They learn to embrace them, but more importantly, learn to pinpoint what is it that's actually bothering them so that we can address it and hopefully move forward. And that's what he was talking about. If I'm getting it on both sides, if the guys don't like it, and the women I would want to pursue don't really seem like they're okay with me being open, then why the hell would I want to be open? Why would I want to share then if nobody in my immediate life seems like they're actually okay or comfortable with that? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I do think that things are changing because even if just when I was, say, elementary age, so like you're 6 to 10 years old.
Mhm.
Even I'd say that age demographic when I was there in the early 2000s and now,
Mhm.
I do see that kids and especially like younger boys are able to more often than it used to be express their emotions
Mm.
through whether typically it's their parents because it's right there or like a friend, but oftentimes you need like that mature person to really give you solid advice. But especially to see nowadays where it may not be perfect, but it is moving in a direction to where it is more accepted than it used to be for men of any age to have that feeling of vulnerability. It may
Yeah.
not be to the extent that more progressive people might want it to be,
Mhm.
but I do want to preface that it is improving or it is changing. Some people might see it as an improvement, some people might not see it as. So I will say it is improving to be more or is changing to be more accepting of men of any age to really express how they are feeling.
And I think that that's beautiful, and I really want that for generations to come. Is that people in general allow for that space for us to be able to express how we're feeling in whatever way, shape, and form that we choose to. Of course, always in a respectful way, and that's something that in therapy we talk about that for those that don't know how to do those in healthy ways. But the point is to allow them to do it. And a lot of those behaviors that we see people do that get them in trouble, that get them, making maybe not the best choices, a lot of that will start to die down because they're allowing a lot of that stuff to come out and not burying it deep down and wondering why they explode on people or they have these explosive situations that, get them in jail or get them in trouble. Those things don't have to happen largely. We can avoid a lot of that stuff, but we have to be willing to actually allow for that space, like you were just talking about, for us to be able to be open. And then for us as the guys to work on being able to learn that language to express it to people. So it's a twofold approach that we have to employ.
You know what I'm saying? Like that's not my type of guy. He's not my type of guy, and I can't be open with sex or accepting having gay friends. Pardon,
That's what you like?
But I can't. Right. You can't be open about certain things because then you become questionable and you're pushed out of the safe space.
Sex is a difficult thing for men to talk about even with each other, especially if you do have some kind of kink.
Because you're not allowed to be vulnerable. You're not allowed to be weak. You're not allowed to fail. And a lot of people that, when you say the suicide rates, you give up because you have nowhere to turn.
I kind of disagree with you on the fact that pressure is causing. I think it's more the lack of support and guidance for a lot of guys. Like, they don't know where to turn. Like a lot of guys, suicide, I think, is like when you lose hope, right? So they just don't have hope.
What about not wanting to go get it? Because there's places to be. There's people to go. You can go to church.
I mean,
you can go to therapy.
As
There's
much as
places
you
to
say
go.
that, but I
Shout
don't
out to
feel
therapy.
like when you say guys don't want to express weakness, I think taking that step is hard for a lot of men, because then that expresses weakness. It's hard for a lot of guys.
You know what's interesting? That what I'm hearing is that as men, you also are victimized by the sexist expectations of masculinity.
It also makes it hard for men to love themselves and love themselves enough to understand that they're in trouble, and I know that's something that happened in my life. It was before I did finally go to therapy and get the demons out that I needed to get out. It took me meeting a woman who actually made me want to love myself.
You found a woman who gave you peace and changed you a lot. Well, great if a man is dating a woman and she doesn't like that he's not masculine enough, it's kind of like, to me, I feel like too bad for him. He should go find someone else. That's part of the dating scene. Everyone has things that they like and things that they don't like.
I feel like your preference is your preference, but at some point I think it's noteworthy and responsible to understand where those preferences or originate.
Not necessarily. I think our life experiences form what we really want in our dating life. And because I grew up in a broken home and I didn't have a man in the house, I want a man who gives me security and protection. I don't think me deconstructing masculine is gonna do that for me. I was missing that in my childhood, and that's what I want in a man.
Any thoughts on that idea of when you were growing up, or anything that maybe you felt like you wanted but you didn't have? Do you think you would seek that out in a future partner?
I would say I was fortunate for the most part, having a family environment that was favorable for the most part.
Hmm.
Like my parents got divorced when I was really young, and obviously that causes problems and stresses,
Hmm.
but it was never really like a major problem for me. So like I don't necessarily have anything family related that really in a negative way that really pushes what I want and how I view masculinity.
Okay.
But I do think it is important to, like I've said a few times, really respecting what a person wants and
Hmm.
not necessarily always pushing for the answers of why do you want this, like why do you want like right before we cut off, like they were wanting a really strong like partner, strong male partner, because they
Hmm.
didn't have that in their household when they were young.
Right. Right.
And I think that is 100% fine to want, and not to like, even if you want a different partner, not look down at somebody or belittle them for wanting that, because
Right.
that is that's what they want, and they're not like hurting you by wanting that. They are doing, as I see it, nothing inherently wrong. It's just they want a really strong man,
Yeah.
and more power to them. And
Sure.
hopefully they can find someone that meets those needs. And like you said
Yeah.
earlier, there obviously you have your preferences, but you need to compromise on certain things.
Hmm.
So you're not going to find somebody that checks every single box on your
No, you
list.
will not.
It's just important to have those. I guess I'd say more umbrella categories that fit the majority of them.
Hmm.
And as long as both of you are willing to compromise on certain aspects, then you'll be all right.
Yeah. I think that was well said. I mean, I look at that and I say, to me, based on what the guy said at the end, there's usually two ways I think that most of us approach things like relationships. You're either, like he was saying, trying to fulfill a void that maybe you felt like you had in your life. Maybe mom wasn't there, so maybe you want a woman to give you some of that feminine, maternal-ish energy. Or maybe you had a good example, which it sounds like what you had, and maybe you want somebody that sort of represents that. For example, I would like a woman like my mom. Not my mom, but a woman like my mom. What does that mean? Well, there's great characteristics and traits that she has. She was family oriented. She was sensitive. She was compassionate. She had empathy. She created space for me to be open. Whatever those things are, right? Being able to break that down, and then you have a more clear idea of what you're looking for when you're trying to date, when you're trying to find someone. Or you could be like what the guy said. These are things that I felt like I was lacking and I was missing due to it not being there. Therefore, that's why I want those things. Equally, I think either one of those, like you said, is totally fine. It's just more understanding why we want what we want so that way
Yeah,
you can explain it.
and that's never something that I've like really like paid much mind to, and still really don't, is knowing why I want what I want.
Mhm.
I'm just like, I know what my interests are, what kind of people I'm interested in,
Mhm.
and I never and don't really pay much more attention to that than that's just everyone has their preferences,
Mhm.
and some people might have that background,
Yeah.
and there may be like for those situations there is, if especially if they recognize it, but I don't know if there's like always like a reason why you want something. There might be, and if there is, I don't know anything about it, but I don't
That's
know if
fair.
I don't know if there's like if it's like I don't know what determines like what you want from a partner or what have you. So
which is totally fair, right? You don't have to know all those things yet. And even to him, right? He feels like he knows some of the reasons why he wants what he wants. The only point that I bring up that I always think is important, and everybody has sort of kind of touched on it in one way or another, is the idea of nurturing. And your environment, to me, really shapes your perception of what you want and what you desire typically in your future. So depending on what you grew up with, if you grew up in a stable environment, a very homey, loving, warm, embracing environment, there's a good chance, not always, but there's a pretty good chance you want to replicate that in your future, right? Because that's what you saw. And if you genuinely enjoyed it, even if you didn't fully appreciate it when you were younger, but you get older and you're like, man, I really like that my mom and my dad were there, or whoever raised me. I like that they were there. I like that we felt really solid, really together. There's a good chance you're probably going to want that. To the other guy's point, if I had some version of that, but I was missing a piece, it's natural when I get to create my own, I may want to fill in that gap because then I'll feel more complete, you know? So it's not so much we have to know every single detail or nuanced point of where that comes from. But what I would say is that a lot of that stems from the environments that we come up in. Either we want the things that we experience to a certain degree, or we want to build things that we didn't have because we felt like there was a missing piece and we would like to fulfill that when it's our turn to create it.
So do you believe that you're, especially growing up at an especially young age, do you think your environment which you grow up in, like
Mhm.
shapes your personality and just like
Mhm.
your general as a person? I guess personality is probably like the best single word to use. And
Yeah.
like, and people typically, human nature is to seek comfort, familiarity. People don't general. It's against your nature to change. So a lot of times it's hard to do something that's very different. So if
Mhm.
you can like keep something familiar,
Right.
you'll feel so much more comfortable.
Absolutely.
So I
Yeah.
think that is like probably one of um the biggest things that and uh I guess affects those types of things. And if you're missing a piece from the puzzle
Mhm.
that made things unpleasant or not whole, then maybe at that point you are actively seeking a change to better just your life. And if you have like kids or anything like that,
Mhm.
providing something. I've always been in the mindset that even though I wouldn't say I had a bad life, but always making sure that if I have kids, that they have an even better life than I was able to live.
Absolutely. That's a general rule of thumb for most parents. I put myself in that category, of course. That's pretty much what we tend to want to do. And when you were talking about like what the environment, does that shape your perception of reality? Absolutely. For most people that I've ever met, perception is reality. Your bias is so strong that whatever you see, you believe that is true for all people. And it's very hard for people to kind of deconstruct that and separate those and say, Alex doesn't see the world that I do, and nobody else does. Only I have this viewpoint. Even when you're growing up in the same household, you don't see all the lived experiences the exact same way because you're not the same person. So, what I would say is, in terms of like personality or perspective, biology does play a role. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying like there's not inherent parts of you that make up who you are. But I believe to a very strong degree, a lot of it is shaped by what you subject that person to. So if I subject a person to stability and love and empathy and compassion, there's a good chance I'm going to raise boy or girl, whatever they are, to be a pretty stable person, a healthy, functioning human. If I put you in a dysfunctional environment where there is no stability, where you constantly have to seek change and there's no sense of grounding, are there exceptions where people do find a way to still become successful and function healthily? Yes. But is that the norm? No, it's not. People are products of their environments. If I take men, which is why we're talking about this, and I put them in environments where they're historically told, whether it's at school, at home, at church, wherever they are, that nobody really cares how you feel. don't talk about it, keep it to yourself, then there should be no wonder that we don't want to open up. There should be no wonder why we don't have the language, why we don't have the skills. Why am I talking about this? Why are we talking about this right now? Why did Vice make that debate? Because it's historically not okay in our society to talk about any of these types of things. So we're trying to challenge that norm because that is the environment that we have grown up in, and saying we can do better. We can allow for that space for us to speak more openly about these different things that we go through, good, bad, and indifferent, not just negative stuff. But we need the people on the other side, anybody who's not as open to that idea presently, to learn to create that space for us so that we can naturally challenge us to work at it. And as you said, future generations will not struggle with it quite as much as we have. I struggle with it a lot because everything that a lot of these guys are talking about, I've experienced, like a lot of men that I've worked with. And it's very difficult to deprogram that. Some guys are just like, that's who I am. I'm not trying to change. And I feel for them because that's not true. It's a willingness thing. You have to be willing to change. That's how change happens. But they also need the support of people to allow them the space to change, to evolve, to grow. So that's where a lot of this part of the debate comes from. And again, that's why I like where a lot of the guys brought these points up and the points you've brought up so far. But let's continue.
Tend to diverge from like the Freudian daddy issues stuff when it comes to like what
Congratulations. I'm so happy for you. I want a man who gives me security.
Thank you.
I think
Freud.
if I'm with a woman and the bad dates I've had is when I'm like talking about my problems, I'm complaining about something, I'm not gonna see that woman. If I'm projecting more strength and I'm more charismatic, I'm positive, I'm probably gonna see that woman. So I think as much as like guys, you know, you want guys to be vulnerable, that doesn't work a lot of times. And I think it just comes down to that.
That's what I'm saying.
That's what it is. Like,
That's what I'm saying.
And it sounds like a lot of you are saying that's wrong.
I'm
Yeah,
not saying
and
that's
it's
wrong.
like-
I'm not saying
it's like-
wrong. I think it is what it is.
I just think that society teaches you have to be a certain way.
And that's really...
And that's my issue. Because
Right.
if this is who you are, your character, right, it just blossoms into this person that loves to pay for dates, loves to open doors, and loves to walk in the house, then that's fine. But when society tells you that from a young boy, that that's the only way to be as a man, this is the only way to be. And you think about things like, say, people on the down low that don't want to come out till later because they're scared of societal pressures, right? You should be able to be whoever you want without society telling you you have to be this way in order to fit in this box.
Pressure is on like the body. Like pressure is to be buff, to like look good.
There is a certain pressure, I guess you can call it, for guys to look a certain way, especially if they're trying to attract women. So I think it comes down to just men who look a certain way tend to look more competent. They can protect.
I was just gonna add on to what you were saying. If a guy looks fit, if a guy looks strong, okay, as a girl, she's probably thinking, if I'm on the street and somebody tries to do something to me, I know that he can handle it.
I also think generally, like, guys who don't have the body that they're looking for, or generally, they're not as healthy. It's not just a look thing, it's just a health thing.
Yeah, that's
you know, the body and mind are connected. If someone is strong, they're probably gonna look strong, and they're probably gonna feel strong. So I think when you say it's a pressure, I think it can be construed as a healthy pressure. Hey, get strong, be strong, because you're gonna be a healthier and more mentally fit individual.
For
That's right,
example, I
baby.
was a gymnast, and I think, you know, the training that I did not only trained my body, but it winded up training my mind and making me a stronger human, period.
I want to echo that point real quick too, because I talk about that a lot in therapy and with people in general. This isn't like a man specific thing, but there absolutely is a interconnectedness, I always say, between like, and there's no particular order, but physical, emotional, and mental health. Like imagine a triangle. They're all interconnected. And sometimes, especially when you're talking about mental health and emotions, that you can't see them, they're not tangible. So you have to look at other things to try to like determine what could be going on with somebody. And physical health is a good way to look at that. You know, if somebody's not getting out of the bed, if somebody's not sleeping well, if somebody's like eating terribly, those are indications perhaps that something is going on beneath the surface that we need to look a little bit more deeper into. So there absolutely is a connection to their point. And I think for a lot of guys, maybe not every guy, but for a lot of guys out there, I think the physical health is a traditional way that we sort of measure ourselves. So if I do look well, I typically do feel better. That helps like boost up my confidence. And if as the guy said, if I'm trying to attract a partner or a mate, that is a bit easier because I'm visually appealing to them, and I'm maybe able to provide a level of physical security if they're like feel threatened, if we're walking on the street, something like that. But also, to me, the health aspect is also more important because it helps me also demonstrate a certain example that hopefully I'm trying to show to other people around me, whether it be other men or other women, or if you have a child, same thing. I'm trying to demonstrate healthy habits, healthy behaviors, healthy expressing myself emotionally, healthily taking care of my body, which helps me take care of my mind. So when I want to engage in these more difficult emotional conversations, I have like the patience to do so because I work really hard on myself across the board. So it's not quite as hard to create that environment within myself to come to you and talk about it because I challenge myself in all these other areas and I'm genuinely pretty successful at it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'd say a big portion of, like you were saying, of being mentally, I guess, strong is just being physically, just being healthy generally makes you feel better. And I know,
Mhm.
at least for me, if it's just like, I don't know if it's just like it's a dumb day or whatever, just going out, like I do a lot of skating for like as like a cardio exercise. So I
Mhm.
like just put my rollerblades on, just go for a skate in the evening, and it's a really good. I really enjoy physical ways of, even if it's like I enjoy constructive physical ways of getting rid of frustration. So that could be going out. Say some people really enjoy going to the gym, lifting
Mhm.
weights, getting that rush. Some
Right.
people enjoy, like I enjoy going out doing some skating, or
Mhm.
even just like some people like boxing, and
Oh yeah.
like boxing is a really good one because you can really
Oh
get out that
yes.
frustration.
Oh yeah.
And I think it is perfectly fine to want that physical outlet to really make yourself feel better, as long as you're not like, obviously you're not projecting that anger and frustration onto another
Mhm.
human being in a physical way.
Correct.
It's fine to go on like a rant to somebody and really kind of go off the cuffs every once in a while, as long as you're like with someone who actually like is actively listening to you and isn't just like ignoring what you're saying the entire time. As long as you're
Absolutely.
like, yeah, I think there's staying physically healthy is just a really important part to just being healthy overall as just a person.
Yeah. I concur, man. And I also challenge a lot of guys because for many of us, physical is like a great way for us to get that sort of release. Like you were talking about the rush. Like I have a heavy bag in my garage. Like I think, if you're having a bad day, what better thing to do? Like I haven't had to do this with somebody yet, but I would love to. If I had a client that was like really pissed off, it's like maybe printing off a picture of whoever they're mad at and like tape it on my heavy bag and be like, hey, go hard. Like let's do some rounds. Let it out because that keeps us mentally sharp where we're not taking out this aggression and hostility towards other people, right? More importantly, to like your loved ones, right? You don't want to be blowing up and exploding on people or exploding on your boss at your job. So that part helps us get that sort of physical exertion. I'm getting this stress, I'm getting this pressure, I'm getting this tension out of me. So maybe when I have to have this conversation with my lady, with my mom, with my sibling, with my child, it's going to be more productive because I'm not so mentally and emotionally preoccupied with whatever was happening earlier on in the day. I've let a lot of that out. I'm going to maybe be more patient. I'm going to be a better listener. I think those are just some of the qualities and some of the benefits of is if we make sure that that is an integral part of our lived experience. Then again, on the mental and emotional side, it's a little bit easier to engage in those difficult conversations. That's what I have to help people learn how to navigate. But if you have so much pent up energy and frustration from all this other stuff, it's hard to create the space to even want to engage in it because you got so many other things like kind of going on in your mind. And I like to use that as a method to sort of help get some of that out.
Yeah, I agree. And I know even the physical, oftentimes, even for me, the physical outlet often leads to a more emotional outlet. So like
Oh yeah.
your emotion, so you're, say it's just you pent up so much anger and frustration
Hmm.
for say months, and I can say I've done this firsthand. So like you build up all this frustration and anger for so long, and then this like the tiniest thing is a straw that breaks the camel's back, and it's something
Hmm.
stupid. It's like you drop your phone on the carpet and you're like, oh darn, I dropped my phone. And
Yep.
normally it's not a big deal, but like that one little thing like sets you over the edge.
Hmm.
And once you lose it, it's kind of it's kind of a mess. Like it's not like constructive at that point. It's causing problems. And I think if that is going to be the way that somebody has to really like get over the edge, having like
Hmm.
maybe a punching bag to really just like get that frustration out and really let them clear their mind of whatever it is that is like haunting them at the time, whatever it
Hmm.
may be. Just like using that physical outlet as something that can be a doorway to a more, I guess, emotional outlet.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned that too. I'll make one more point on that. I don't know if do you ever hear of the show Beyond Scared Straight?
I have not.
Okay. I'll give you like a quick premise. It's basically a show. It's usually set in like a environment, a jailhouse environment, and it's usually young people. So like juveniles, anybody usually under the age of 18, who have committed different offenses, but largely a lot of them this is like their first offense where they're in the juvenile justice system. Like they've been in front of a judge, stuff like that. And so it's one of these programs, like kind of like an outreach program, where they're trying to help stop those young boys from entering the adult criminal justice system, where they have to go to quote unquote big boy jail. And so what they do is they have them go into a men's jail with these really, really, I don't know if you've been in a jail before. I have. I used to intern in one. Pretty hostile environment, but they have men who are like trying to give them what we would say in the community, give them the game, give them experience about this is how life could go if you don't listen. Because I was you. I've already been where you are. And I'm telling you, if you keep doing what you're doing, this is the path you're going to be on. And what's funny is what some of the things that they would do is they would work them out. So they have these guys in there, they have them usually over like a weekend and they're working with them and their parents are agreeing to this. So it's not like they're holding them against their will. And they're allowed at certain points still, like I'll have to find the clip at some point, but they're working these boys out like military style. They're working them, breaking them down. And then to your point, that's when the emotions come out because they're so drained physically, like they can't put up that wall anymore that stops the emotions from being able to come out. And those are the parts that I look for. Like I truly relish those moments. Not that you have to go through all of that. The point of what we're talking about is so you don't have to do all that. I don't want to have to be your drill sergeant and like punish you corporally and physically to get you to lower your guard so that we can finally talk about these things that are bothering you. That's essentially the point there. But let's get back into the story.
The skinniest person here.
Pretty skinny.
You skinny? All right, as the second skinniest person here. No, it's like, I don't know. It's like, yeah, you do. I've had a bunch of girls like friend zone me, and I'd be like, why? And they're like, you're just too skinny. And I'd be like, damn. I mean, they kept it so real, I can't.
That's, yeah,
But I'm
kind of
like-
him to say that, yeah. Is saying that there is a good and natural connection between like feeling good, healthy habits, looking good, and that there's a masculine ideal to that of some sort. Does anyone disagree with that here?
I do. Body diversity exists across like multiple spectrums, and I think that it's unfair to like only attribute like mental fortitude and like mental strength to like physical strength. Not having like a perfectly in shape body doesn't necessarily mean you're unhealthy by any means. And I also don't think it necessarily means that you like lack mental fortitude.
I don't think I'm saying that to look strong is the only way to be mentally strong. I think as long as you feel like you have a competent physical body, I think that's going to benefit your mental health.
How do you define competent?
Yeah, I think in terms of what you're trying to do. So are you a student? Like, what are your endeavors in life?
Me?
Yes.
I'm a student athlete.
Okay, what kind of sport?
I'm a springboard diver.
Okay, do you train to do springboard diving?
Yeah.
Okay, and do you feel good when you train and you do well on the springboard?
Yeah.
I think that's what I mean. That's what I'm talking about. And if you feel competent at the endeavors you're trying to do, I think that's
But I think
what
that there
contributes to
are
a
lots
mental.
of like non-athletic people who may not be in like the same physical shape as like an athlete would be,
Right.
who are competent in what they're trying to do because that like action has nothing to do with like their like.
So that's where I disagree with you. That's where I
Yeah.
disagree with you. I think some people who don't realize the potential for their physical to blend into their mental is something that needs to be talked about. I think it's undervalued.
That's exactly the point that we were just making. I'm not going to rehash the whole thing, but I 100% agree. They are interconnected. It's not one without the other where you can say you can be mentally competent. I believe you can be mentally strong, but if you have sort of also the discipline to take care of yourself, because you understand that helps, again, keep you sort of emotionally available, I would say, then you would recognize, hey, okay, it is important for me to engage in these types of activities. Like you were talking about skating or you're swimming or you go to the gym or whatever it is that you do, you box. The point is to make the effort to do those things because it does help benefit your mental, which also helps benefit your emotional health.
It's not that you have to work out to have a competent mind. It's that working out does help with competency. We already know when you work out, endorphins are released, people feel better. There's so many times I wake up, I don't want to go to the gym. It's going to be the worst day ever. I'm in a bad mood. I go, my endorphins are released. I'm great. I'm woken up. Like we have the science for that. So
Especially if I'm
Listen,
It's not
I think
like
it plays very little. We've had presidents in wheelchairs that were very confident, successful men who couldn't walk. And so I'm going to say that it doesn't define you
I
as
think
a
there's
man.
always a...
But is there societal pressure to be in shape for men?
I don't-
And then when I don't like when I'm having sex and my stomach like is over her butt or whatever. Like I want to eat less, me, but
Paul can
nobody's
change
like, yo,
that.
you're fat.
We've spent all this time like deconstructing masculinity and all these things, but then it seems as though if a woman or someone dating says, hey, I want a swole guy, suddenly it's like, sorry, I don't think that's a societal pressure. That's what that woman wants and she's entitled to have.
But
It's context.
I also, I have body type.
Yeah, I agree with
preferences.
that.
Like I'm not gonna say what it is, but there's certain girls where I'll go on and I'm like, you don't really have what I'm looking. I don't say that because that's the dick, but in my head, I'm just like, this isn't gonna work.
So
I
it's
think
one
that's
thing to
fair.
have a preference and another thing to make like a sweeping like conclusion and then like broadcast it everywhere.
No, people are entitled to date their preference.
Because when you look at statistics, they say that, 70% of CEOs are over the size 6'4", for example. So there is amongst men a pressure to be bigger, and bigger men tend to be in charge. And that's proven, statistically proven. And so there is a pressure for men who are naturally smaller, naturally overweight, naturally not as fit, to become fit or to become bigger.
Well, and every one
and
of
I
us
think-
here have heard little man syndrome.
We've
all
Who hasn't heard
every
that
one
saying?
of us.
He's got Napoleon syndrome. He's got little man syndrome.
That's a thing, though.
There's nothing you can do about it, and that's where it becomes harmful. Specifically, like short king spring or whatever. Like a person, you can't there is I guess on Twitter I've seen people getting a surgical procedure to break their legs and add 6 inches to their height or something like that.
It's stuff you can't.
You know what I mean? It's but besides that, which is a really expensive procedure, it's also comes into socioeconomic background and things like that as well too.
And
it's
you're never gonna-
you literally can't do anything about that. I think that's where it becomes harmful. Which all right, if there is the pressure in which I can't date a person or I can't get a position or I can't do X, Y, and Z because I'm not a certain height or something I literally cannot change about myself. What now?
What is big dick energy?
It's when confidence crosses the line of arrogance. That's exactly.
I don't
People have told me
no.
people have told me I have.
I forgot that they asked this question. I'm curious. I'm just curious before they keep going. Had you heard that term before?
all the time.
Okay.
It's
I won't
it's
ask.
not it's
I won't ask you to
it's not
define
a
it
new
unless you want
term.
to. Okay. I only heard it because of a song, like a female artist I heard made a song about it. But
Oh,
other than that, I didn't know that that was like really a thing. But apparently, it's becoming more popular now.
BDE.
You have BDE?
Yeah, people told me I had BDE.
You did in that back room.
Not to show off.
Right? Even he said, look at that.
I think BDE is like just a confident man. I don't think it's an arrogant man. I don't find arrogance to be big dick energy. I find it to be insecure. If you're arrogant, you're trying to like, I don't.
There's no
I find
political
it
stage.
so odd to equate somebody's like the size of their genitals to like the quality of their character. Like what? That's nobody's
There's a lot of
business.
odds. More of
See,
just
that-
like a metaphor.
I don't agree though.
Yeah, for confidence.
See, but
It's not really like
then it comes back. Now we're getting into like a deeper conversation, which like some men see a value based off the size of what they're carrying between their legs. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So like that's why the conversation of big dick energy comes into place, because people feel as though like a man that's like more that's packing more down there. You know what I mean? Is more like one, they're better in bed. They're like more confident people. They're exuding a certain energy. So
I gotta ask you real quick. Do you think that there's any relationship there? Like, if you're packing more down there, like you're gonna be respected more, or you're a more competent man?
I don't think it matters so much as like you'll be respected more, because you wouldn't be walking down the street and be like, oh, that guy over there. But like as you as a person,
Yeah.
I say generally, like, just using the term, it might give you a sense of like confidence,
hmm
but I don't think necessarily in the world that it really makes that much of a difference. But like in terms of like just feeling the confidence and using it as like a term for, I just see it as just I guess just to define it, it's just like you just kind of have a very commanding presence. Like you walk into a room, you have that bolstering confidence. You're not
Mhm.
like you're very what's the word? Extroverted. Like you have I think it's just like you walk into a room, you really have like a commanding presence.
Mhm.
And that's just kind of how if someone says it, then that's just kind of how I interpret it when someone says it.
Sure. I mean, I think that's a fair definition. I mean, that's probably how I would define it as well. I've never attempted to, but I would say, yeah, it's when you feel a certain level of confidence in what you're doing, who you are, how you carry yourself. I think that's what BDE would mean. And I would agree the whole arrogance thing. I don't think that that's attractive by men or women. I don't think men are looking at them and saying like, "Oh yeah, that's something to strive for." I think that it could be that you're compensating maybe for something, but I don't think genitalia necessarily in the literal sense is what they're talking about. I think it's very much as a just a form of expression.
like the stereotypes, so the stereotypes associated with having a big dick.
The lack of a need to overcompensate to society because you're adequate.
You know what you got.
You walk with confidence because
Right.
you can tell when somebody's putting on because they lack in certain ways. And men, me, and people I know equate manhood and masculinity to their dick size and how much money they got. Like it's like, yo, you feel more confident.
And sometimes that kind of stuff bleeds into violence. And you see that in domestic violence situations, like men are like the perpetrators of that by and large. There's something wrong with masculinity when it becomes violent.
100%. I also think because of testosterone and a number of different things, men are inherently more violent.
But being able to control it, that's
Yeah, we
the
should
important.
teach
It's being able to
self-control.
control
That's
it.
where the
Yeah.
responsibility comes in.
Yeah.
I think you hear the whole saying like it's better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war, and I think there's a lot of wisdom behind that saying.
Oh, George Orwell said people sleep peaceably in their beds at night because rough men stand ready to do violence on their behalf. I think that's a big thing, but the key is to be ready, to have the ability. And also the humility and the confidence to not use it unless it's absolutely necessary. I don't think we teach boys that enough because I think promoting violence is extremely toxic.
Is there something inherently violent about masculinity?
Let me touch on that real quick too, because I think that was important, and that's a very big concept to sort of break down. But the idea of being able to perpetrate violence if necessary, if somebody's threatening you, your family, your loved ones, what have you. I think for a lot of women, that can be something that they may inherently desire from us, is just feeling that protective nature. Like you're in the house, there's a knock at the door, it's 1:30 in the morning, kind of who's going down the stairs, who's going to the door to go answer that door. More often than not, your female partner is probably going to want you to go do it. And so I think it's feeling that confidence that you will do whatever you need to do to protect them, to protect your family, to protect yourself is very important. But I like what the vet said, is demonstrating self-control.
Yeah.
So when they're talking about young boys should hear that more, I absolutely agree. And I'm going to make a quick little PSA, particularly for the Black and brown communities, because that's where I grew up and that's what I saw a lot of. And a lot of us, like, violence is the norm in many cases, in terms of showing that dominant nature. You can't mess with me because I'll beat you up. Like, let me show you right now. And that doesn't help to demonstrate a level of efficiency and self-control that you have to operate with in society. Unfortunately, or fortunately, however you want to look at it, you don't get to go to your job and like beat your CEO up or your manager up and say, oh, now your job is my job because I beat you up. Right? We don't live in this primitive society where you can get away with that. Right? So part of it is, okay, maybe I have the ability to demonstrate that level of violence or security if I needed to. But I also understand in our society, because we are civilized, there's really no need for me to engage with people in that way. I need to be able to behave in a responsible manner, conduct myself as a healthy, functioning adult, where I'm not going to go off on people, scream at people, yell at people, threaten them, intimidate them, all these types of things, because that's not how men should operate. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I agree with that.
So I really like the way he put that together. And I do agree, for a lot of the young boys, a lot of them can demonstrate violence because that's just common for us. That's what boys do. Like, we tend to fight. But it's also learning, like, when's it appropriate? You don't need to do that all the time. And like you were talking about a moment ago, focus it or channel it into something. Let's channel it into boxing, skating, swimming, like put it into something constructive. I don't need to be threatening anybody. I want people around me to think like I'm a jovial, easygoing type of person. I can protect myself when necessary, but generally I get along with people and I have a good sense of eternal, what we call emotional regulation. I don't go off and blow up on people because I don't know how to keep myself in check. If you get what I mean.
Yeah, I'm someone who likes to avoid like physical altercations if you can.
Mhm.
But like there's times where you need to, if someone's getting physical with you
Mhm.
or someone a loved one or really anybody, there are times where you need to really, I guess, step it up and really not allow certain things to go down. Like I won't give specific examples right now,
Right.
but just like in general, if I think it's important to really be able to. This just circles back to my initial definition of masculinity. Is just being able to support in any way, in every way possible,
Mhm.
and that goes from physically supporting your family and if that was ever necessary, to actually helping put food on the table and stuff like that. And that's not to say that a woman is not able to do those exact same things.
Mhm.
But when me trying to be a masculine male, that is, at the end of the day, that is what I strive to do, and that is what I'm going to do. And it may like some people may have different ideas, may disagree on or may have different opinions on what really makes a man.
Mhm.
But I know what is important to me, and I'm going to really like respect respect what I my own ideals, I guess.
Mhm.
And
No, I think that's
having
fair.
self-respect is an important aspect of it. As long as you're not, and as long as you're having good is subjective, but good morals, I guess.
Yeah. No, I would agree. I mean, to me, that self-respect would absolutely have to do with conducting myself then in a way where I'm being respecting of others. So if I'm operating from like a violent perspective, it's going to be hard to respect myself because I'm not really respecting anybody else around me. So then
Yeah.
I know, then of course I shouldn't expect them to respect me because I'm being disrespectful to them. So I think it's important, again, to the guy's point, to keep that in mind. It does matter how we grow up and sort of how we give that good example of how men should carry themselves. Yes. Do we have a high propensity to be violent? Yes. But that's not something that should be expected that can happen at any moment. As you said, there may be moments where that is necessary, and we can understand that. But at the same time, in my normal day to day, because we are a civilized society, that's not going to be acceptable. And I think that that's okay.
Inherently violent? I don't think so.
No?
I don't think so. If a majority of men were bad, evil, violent, a lot of us would not be sitting here today. Okay, we'd still be in the Stone Age. You know what I mean? That's why I kind of push back against that idea that inherently men are violent, inherently masculinity is bad, is violent, because I don't believe that that's true.
Why do you think that such a vast majority of mass shootings are done by men?
I think that's a mental health issue. I think that, and this is why we're talking about men in crisis. Yeah, because men are more willing to do what they have to, to not do what they have to do, but to take action in terms of that. And that's how we talk about this, men in crisis. A lot of those mass shooters are males because a lot of males, they don't know how to have an outlet or to find outlets to talk about what their issues are. That's what it comes down to.
We know that these mass shooters, most of them are white males. We know that. So when I talk to a lot of white males that have traditional values, say, or maybe a traditional upbringing, they feel like they've been made to be the villains of society. And so I feel that pressure a lot of times. I feel like, hey, like when we're having this conversation, even I hear words like patriarchy, traditional society, right? So I feel like I'm being put in a box and made to be the villain. And I hear this from a lot of white males. I feel like I'm the bad guy. I feel like I'm the villain. So maybe at some point, mentally, they're breaking and becoming that villain. They're becoming that monster that they've been made out to be.
Be the exception. Yeah. If you're worried about being put into a box that is one that is like clearly harmful based on like what people are doing, then don't do that. Mass shooters is like obviously like a sensitive topic, but a lot of them are like men with like little to no friends who like go out and in like a burst of rage commit like atrocities. And I don't think that it has to do with how they're hardwired as men. I think that it has to do with how society like treats people like that.
I agree with you on the point that men need support and they need someone to talk to and talk about these issues.
I don't think that men have been taught emotional intelligence throughout life, right? We know, so we respond with anger. All right, if I'm disappointed, if I feel resentment, or I feel contempt, or I feel embarrassment, or I feel jealous, or any of these things that fall under that one thing, we respond with one way. And if we learn how to communicate better, if we were able to say, yo, you know what? I resent that you spoke to me that way. Or, I feel jealous, of whatever. If it was okay for men to express those things, we wouldn't feel a need to just go, you know what? Fuck you.
That's exactly what I was saying earlier. That's exactly what I was saying earlier. That is my experience, is the vast majority of men, regardless of race, ethnic boundaries or backgrounds, socioeconomic status, where you grew up in the country. That's where so many of us come from. It's just not okay. And we talked about that too earlier, that anger is the most accepted one, even when people don't like it. And so if we want to change that, number one, he also made the other point that we have to learn the language. A lot of guys don't know the words to express how they're feeling. So naturally, we just talk around stuff. It's like anything you've ever tried to do in your life that you didn't know how to do the first time and the first few times, it's not going to go well. It's going to take longer to do that thing because you don't really know the best ways to identify how to go about it. So to his point, I absolutely couldn't concur more that if more men were able to learn these things, which is why I'm glad they're talking about mental health and going to therapy, That's where you can learn those things. And then we as a society and in your families and all of that can support that more often to become the norm. And you won't see men responding with rage all the time or with anger all the time. They'll learn other feeling words, other ways to describe what's bothering them. Then we can actually address the issue and move forward. Anything you want to add to that?
No, I think you pretty much hit the nail on the head with all your statements there.
Okay.
I agree with everything you just said.
Okay. Shout out to that guy, though, because he made a really good point. I really wanted to support that.
You can take any two 3-year-olds. You take a 3-year-old boy and a 3-year-old girl. I have 2 girls. You know, their first instinct is to lie to me, to manipulate me, to say their sister said this when she didn't. I have a friend that has all boys. You know what they do? They throw a fire truck at your head. Bam. That's a natural response. That's not a learned behavior. They're taught.
Oh, that's totally a learned behavior. And you give kids
that's
only
a
like
learned
cars
behavior,
and gun and G.I. Joe action figures and give girls Barbie dolls. Like you
I don't think you could say it's one or the other. I think there is some interplay between both.
Thank you guys for your honesty, your like willingness to go to uncomfortable places, willingness to debate one another.
So that was it, man. I think that it was quite a rousing and interesting discussion that they put together. And I'm sure you saw now that you've got to watch the whole thing that there was a lot of different perspectives and attitudes. You know, people didn't all agree. Any general thoughts or takeaways from kind of what the guy shared?
I'm just generally glad that even in because there were obviously points where they had disagreements on certain things,
Mhm.
but I don't think it ever got to the point to where it was hostile. It was
Yeah.
it was I can't think of anything off the top of my head where it became like there may have been. I think there were a few points where there was a lot of repeating the same fact over a lot of times.
Mm.
And I think a lot of that there was not a lot of progress to be made on certain aspects.
Sure.
But for the most part, in terms of like actually respecting, because there were like a bunch of different types of people in that
Yeah.
panel.
Yes, there were.
So like the fact that they were able to have that conversation, and even debates will always have like heated moments because people
Mhm.
are passionate with what they believe.
Absolutely.
But I think that was a good example of what a conversation can be like now, where you can have your own specific beliefs, have a conversation about it with someone who has the polar opposite, and still
Mhm.
walk away respecting them as a person and not having just hostility towards them for them having a different opinion than you. And I think
Yeah.
that's just a
Mhm.
general issue with you see a lot of today's with society, and it's
Mhm.
nice to see that hopefully more um, things like this can happen.
Absolutely. And good observation. I had a very similar feeling myself. This being my second time watching it, I kind of picked up on some other things, but that's generally a takeaway that I had. And I want for us as people, right, is to be willing to engage with people who do not hold your viewpoint and be willing to engage with them in good faith and in a respectful manner. I understand when people get disrespectful, you may need to pull back. I completely get that. But I'm saying when you're just engaging in, we have different viewpoints, that in and of itself should not be inherently threatening. That's an opportunity to engage and actually try to understand each other and why we feel the way that we do. But for a lot of us, we're not even creating that space. We're just like, you go over there because you don't follow the ideology that I hold. So I don't want to hear it. And for a lot of those guys, I was pleasantly surprised. I remember the first time I watched it a week ago. I was pleasantly surprised how some of them were very good at articulating how they felt and how they had evolved and changed. Like the brother who had the daughters, who was the military veteran, and how he grew from being this angry young man into being more sensitive and understanding because he had women in his life that kind of demanded that from him, and he rose to the occasion. Or the brother who was, I believe he was from New York, he was talking about, traditional masculine values, particularly in the Black community, of growing up on the street corner and what that looked like and not having your father around and how that impacts you. You're hearing all these diverse viewpoints and lived experiences. And I agree with you. I'm happy that they were able to share that. And even though they did not always agree, it was able to be respectful. I think that's a great sign, what we were touching on earlier, of what it means to be a respectable man. That's having self-control. I don't need to dominate you just because you hold a different viewpoint than me. We can engage, we can meaningfully agree to disagree and keep it moving. So I thought that that was well said. And just the nature of what they were talking about. This is a very complex and nuanced issue. And as a therapist, I'm telling you, because I live in this world of gray, that the world is not black and white, contrary to popular belief. It is great for trying to formulate arguments, because then you can put people in one of two boxes, a binary, and then attack the other side. But unfortunately, we as people, and therefore societies, because they're composed of people, are inherently complicated. And we need to understand that. The more that we are willing to understand that, the more likely we'll be able to interact with and engage with people who hold those different viewpoints respectfully and come away with some degree of actual understanding, whether it's men and men, women and women, parents and children, whoever we're talking about. You can actually get more meaningful dialogue and productive conversation if we choose to go about it that way. So I hope that anybody who watched this and listened to this and our breakdown, again, Alex, I really appreciate you for giving your honest thoughts, man, that you guys encourage us by liking and commenting on these videos, because this was just the first of one. There's been some really good debates I've seen that I would like to touch on, and maybe we can have some different people come on to engage with it. But again, I appreciate you for being here, man. I know this is a very complicated issue to talk about, but I'm hoping that this might have sparked some interest or some curiosity for some people who have some strongly held beliefs and might consider talking to somebody else who has a different view. So with that being said, I appreciate you all for being here. Until next time, we're going to sign off. So peace out.
See ya.